Last year, China exported more than 1.7 million new energy vehicles, ranking first in the world. In the first half of this year, this momentum has not weakened, but has continued to advance at a faster pace. But on June 12, 2024, the European Union suddenly passed a tax increase measure on Chinese new energy vehicles. According to statistics, the EU will impose tariffs of 17.4%, 20% and 38.1% on China's BYD, Geely Auto and SAIC Group respectively, and 21% on other manufacturers. For Chinese automakers, temporary tariffs of 17.4% to 38.1% mean severe market access barriers. Faced with the EU's tough attitude, China did not choose to remain silent. On the contrary, China quickly took countermeasures to restrict the import of European gasoline vehicles and launched an anti-dumping investigation on pork products exported by the EU to China. In order to ease the tension between the two sides, the EU sent German Economy Minister Robert Habeck to visit China on June 21, 2024. But China did not slow down. Instead, it took this opportunity to issue an ultimatum to the EU, requiring the EU to cancel its unfair treatment of Chinese electric vehicle products by July 4, otherwise it will take further action. So, will the EU continue to stick to its protectionist stance or choose to shake hands with China? Before discussing the answer to the question, let us first understand why the EU imposes high tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. In recent years, international geo-economic competition has become increasingly fierce, and the gap between Europe and China and the United States in specific areas of emerging disruptive technologies in new energy vehicles has gradually widened. It is understood that the technical performance of China's electric vehicles and their batteries not only has certain advantages over similar European products, but the prices of these electric vehicles are generally 20% lower than similar models manufactured in the EU. This situation has led to China's exported electric vehicles accounting for 8% of the EU electric vehicle market share in 2023, and may reach 15% in 2025. Faced with this severe challenge, the EU has begun to implement a series of economic security and supply chain security strategies since last year, aiming to reduce its strategic dependence on China. In this de-risking campaign, the French government is well aware that only by improving the market competitiveness of its own new energy vehicles can it occupy a place in the global market and avoid being left far behind by competitors such as China. To this end, France, together with some EU member states, imposed tariffs of 17.4%, 20% and 38.1% on China's BYD, Geely Automobile and SAIC Group respectively in June this year, and imposed a 21% tariff on other manufacturers. In 2023, the sales volume of Chinese automakers in the EU market reached 221,000 vehicles, with a market share of 1.86%. Although this share is still small, the year-on-year growth rate of more than 100% shows the strong growth momentum of Chinese automakers in the EU market. For Chinese automakers, after the imposition of tariffs, electric vehicles exported from China to the EU will face unprecedented cost pressure. Take BYD as an example. Its selling price in the domestic market already includes high production costs and a certain profit margin. In the European market, due to the increase in additional costs such as transportation, tariffs, taxes and marketing, the price of this model is much higher than that in China. Now, with the addition of this 17.4% tariff, the price of this model in the European market will be further increased, which directly weakens its price competitiveness. For any company, it is difficult to sustain long-term profitless or loss-making operations. In this case, China quickly took countermeasures. On the one hand, it restricted the import of European gasoline vehicles, and on the other hand, it launched an anti-dumping investigation on pork products exported from the EU to China. As one of the world's largest automobile markets, China imported about 1.3 million gasoline vehicles in 2023, of which about 500,000 were from Europe. If we calculate based on the average value of each European gasoline vehicle of $40,000, restricting the import of European gasoline vehicles will cause a loss of $20 billion to Europe. It is worth mentioning that among these European gasoline vehicles, German brands such as Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Audi are deeply loved by Chinese consumers. According to statistics, among the 500,000 European gasoline vehicles, German brands account for 150,000. Once imports are restricted, German car companies will have to find new market export channels to make up for the losses in the Chinese market. But this is not an easy task in the context of slowing global economic growth and rising trade protectionism. Therefore, the German automotive industry may face unprecedented difficulties, which will not only affect corporate profits, but also may affect employment and stability of the entire industrial chain. At the same time, China launched an anti-dumping investigation on pork products exported from the EU to China, which made the EU pork industry feel an unprecedented chill. As one of the world's largest pork consumers, China consumes more than 50 million tons of pork each year, accounting for nearly half of the world's total consumption. Although China is also a major pork producer with an annual output ranking among the top in the world, domestic production is still difficult to meet all needs in the face of growing demand. Therefore, China still needs to import a large amount of pork every year to make up for the gap between supply and demand, and the import volume has been rising year by year. Before this, China's imported pork products mainly came from many countries and regions, including the EU, the United States, Brazil, etc. Among them, the EU has a place in the Chinese market with its high-quality pork products. However, once the anti-dumping investigation is established and anti-dumping duties are implemented, the competitiveness of EU pork in the Chinese market will be greatly frustrated. Industry experts predict that the market share of EU pork may drop significantly, and sales may drop sharply from the current stable level, with a specific drop of up to 30% to 40%. At the same time, prices will also be severely impacted, and the original competitive price advantage will no longer exist, and prices are expected to rise by at least 20%. This is undoubtedly a fatal blow to EU pork producers who rely on the Chinese market. In this cold winter, EU producers who focus on high-value-added pork products such as pig offal and pig heads will feel the biting cold even more. These products often earn higher profits in the Chinese market, but now they may lose the market due to the implementation of anti-dumping duties. Take Germany as an example. As an important pork exporter in the EU, its pork exports to China reached 4 million tons in 2023. Once the anti-dumping measures are implemented, the German pork industry will face a loss of $4 billion, and the market pressure is unprecedented. Based on these factors, Germany's Minister of Economy paid a 3-day visit to China on June 21, 2024. During the visit, the German Minister of Economy faced the soft underbelly of EU policies and sharply criticized its protectionist tendencies in the field of electric vehicles. However, China did not soften its position. Instead, it took this opportunity to issue a clear ultimatum to the EU, to cancel the unfair treatment of Chinese electric vehicle products before July 4, otherwise further action will be taken. Faced with this tense situation, the German Minister of Economy has demonstrated a high degree of diplomatic wisdom and actively promoted dialogue between China and the EU, especially on the sensitive issue of the EU's plan to impose additional tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. In this game, China has obviously taken the initiative, and its firm position and clear timetable have put the EU under unprecedented pressure. The 10-day deadline issued by China to the EU is like an insurmountable gap, testing the EU's decision-making wisdom and unity. It is worth noting that the EU is not a monolithic entity in this dispute. On June 12, 2024, Hungarian Minister of National Economy Nagy Martin clearly expressed his opposition to the imposition of tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, emphasizing the importance of cooperation and free market competition. This position has been supported by 3 EU member states, accounting for about 11% of the total. Looking back at history, the United States once raised tariffs on Chinese imported cars, but the result triggered China's reciprocal countermeasures against American cars, and both sides were ultimately harmed. This lesson has made more EU member states begin to reflect on whether they should repeat the same mistakes and sacrifice good trade relations with China in exchange for short-term industrial protection. As the Sino-EU electric vehicle trade dispute continues to ferment, more and more EU member states are beginning to prefer seeking a peaceful solution rather than continuing to promote measures that may trigger a full-scale trade war. Against this backdrop, it seems that the EU's surrender to China has become an inevitable outcome. But this is not a simple surrender, but the inevitable result of both sides seeking a new balance point in the global economic landscape. In the future, how China and Europe can achieve win-win cooperation in emerging industries such as electric vehicles will become a key issue affecting the direction of the global economy.